The Department of Defense continues to provide the president with robust options regarding military aid to Ukraine, consistent with his goal of bringing this tragic war to an end. And at the same time, the department is rigorously examining and adapting its approach towards achieving this objective while also preserving U.S. military readiness and defense priorities that support the president's America First agenda. This capability review, and that's exactly what it is, it's a capability review, is being conducted to ensure U.S. military aid aligns with our defense priorities. And we will not be providing any updates to specific quantities or types of munitions being provided to Ukraine or the timelines associated with these transfers. I mean, we see this as a common sense, pragmatic step towards having a framework to evaluate what munitions are sent and where. But we want to be very clear about this last point. Let it be known that our military has everything that it needs to conduct any mission, anywhere, anytime, all around the world. We have the most lethal fighting force in the world. If you need further proof of that, look no further than Operation Midnight Hammer and the total obliteration of Iran's nuclear ambitions there.
Yeah, I bet he doesn't want you to look any further for evidence, because that was a military airstrike, period, full stop, not a war. Because if you say you're the most lethal force on the planet, you've got to be able to fight and sustain large-scale operations against a peer or near-peer adversary a la Russia. And don't look there, because then you're going to find out very quickly that we don't have the capacity to go toe-to-toe. But I digress. This whole comment he made on July the 3rd was in light of the suspension that we had enacted. I believe it was on either late on the night of June 30th or the morning of July 1st. So he was basically validating that we had done this analysis and that we have America First. This is what America First looks like. But don't worry, because we can do everything we want. Well, that wasn't exactly reassuring, but nevertheless, all right, this is why we paused it until President Trump, a couple of days later, decided, let's go ahead and unpause that. Well, The Guardian reported just last night, quite in contrast to what the NBC News reported here, says that the U.S. only has 25% of all Patriot missile interceptors needed for the Pentagon's plan. According to the article, the stockpile of the Patriot missiles has fallen so low that it raised concern inside the Pentagon that it could jeopardize potential U.S. military operation. And Deputy Secretary Stephen Feinberg authorized the transfer to be halted while they review where the weapons were being sent. So who are you going to believe? Who are we listening to? Which of these leaked information? The NBC News one that says, everything's fine. The Guardian here that says you got 25% what you need. And what is the actual truth? I mean, it's like we don't really know what's going on here. So even within the United States, we're sending out incredibly conflicting signals. Now, just looking at the landscape of things that we can see without knowing anything about classified information behind the scenes, we've been supplying Ukraine, other than a couple of 3 pauses of a few days, for 3.5 years, roughly. Okay. And of course, there was a lot before that too, but we'll just keep it during the actual time of the conflict. We've also been supplying Israel with lots of interceptor missiles because of their wars against the Houthis, against the Hezbollah, against the Hamas, of course, which is ongoing, and recently against Iran. So that's a lot of missiles additionally sucked down, because they nearly all come from American production, or American stockpiles. And then here in this latest salvo with this so-called 12-day war, the U.S. physically took part in that in shooting down. So it wasn't just the Israeli side. It wasn't just us giving missiles. We also fired them. That's on top of what we were doing in the Red Sea against the Houthis on our own, where we continued to use a lot of these interceptor missiles. Allah, there have been a buttload of missiles expended in the last 3.5 years, and then doubled up during the Israeli time, and then during this next time, even more concentrated. I'm telling you, folks, according to even open source material, which I have confirmed from those who have access behind the scenes, it's true. We have around 600 interceptor missiles we can produce per year. per year. And one of the things that had President Trump all hot and bothered and why he reversed this decision is because Ukraine has been hit by increasingly high numbers of Russian air attacks, both with the drones, especially the Shahed, but also the Kinzhal missiles, several of the other kinds of missiles that Russia has fired. You're talking, last night was the biggest one ever. There was 730 something that were fired. And the 550 a few days before that was then the biggest. And there was 500 and something the day before that, which was then the biggest. Russia continues to ramp this up. A handful of more missiles, folks, is not going to make any difference. Ukraine claimed that they shot down almost everything last night. I'm skeptical. We'll see, because we know for sure on the 551, and Gary has shown you a lot of B-roll over the last week, especially where you see all kinds of Shaheds going in. Nothing's taking them down, both in the daylight and at nighttime. They're just blowing stuff up left and right. So I'm skeptical that happened. But having a lot of air defense interceptor missiles, by the way, most of the air defense interceptor missiles are for incoming enemy missiles. They're not for Shahed drones. You have to have something else to get that. So the more Russia does this, the more it's going to sap what we have. A handful more is not going to help Ukraine. Period. Full stop. Zero chance that reverses anything. It'll, again, it will probably reduce the amount of missiles that come through, but it's clear Russia has them. Russia's capacity to produce them is way more than ours, especially on the offensive side. So it's not going to make any difference. But what it will do is it will continue to degrade our inventory and our stockpiles, period. It can't be any other way. It's math. We can't produce them at scale like the Ukrainians are wanting to use them. Now, apparently, we're going to send another battery on top of the interceptor missiles. And you just got to think, what is going on here? Who's in charge of the country and in the Pentagon itself? Because there are clearly people in the Pentagon who have the right focus, who are doing the math, who are doing the correct analysis, and are making the right decisions. That's good, but there's too many others, as you see in the contrasting NBC and Guardian articles, which allegedly both talked to Pentagon officials, got a radically different answer. You had the Democrat Smith saying, oh, no, there's fine. I've seen the numbers. Well, then are these guys lying? Was the Undersecretary of Defense, just meant the Feinberg, was he lying? Because they can't both be true. So somebody's lying, or they don't know and they're just making stuff up. That's certainly possible, if not probable. But the bottom line is here, this continues to because of the so-called elite in the West, and whether you're talking about the Washington Post, the President of the United States, the Pentagon, these people have had great reputations and credibility over the time where people listen to them. And that's what's happening in Ukraine right now, as the New York Times pointed out, is that they were optimistic, hopeful, but cautious on Trump's U-turn on the weapons leaves. So the Ukrainians themselves are voicing that they have some hope, but that they're cautious because, like I said earlier, this is the third time this stuff is flipped back and forth. But they shouldn't have any hope, folks. This is false hope. This is what I say is the most pernicious effect of this nonsense that we've been doing for so long now, for the majority of this. In fact, I would go so far as to say the entirety of this 3.5-year war, by giving hope to the Ukrainian people that just hang on a little bit longer, just fight a little bit more, and then things will turn around. No, they won't. They won't turn around, because whatever Trump does, it's going to be well more than overmatched by what the Russians continue to do. And you see that their stockpiles are obviously accelerating when they can afford to shoot, 500 here, 500 there, now 700 there. Reports say that it's going to go up to 1,000 per night total. Nobody has that kind of air defense capability. You're going to be saturating the skies and overwhelming, and then there's just nothing you can do. Everything that you need is going to continue to be exploited. And at some point, that's going to have a desperate and a death knell on the Ukraine side, because this is concurrent with what's going on the front lines. And there was continued moves overnight in the Sumy area, and in the Kupiansk area, and in the Zaporizhia area, also in the areas around the Pokrovsk area. Again, every day there's continued going forward by the Russian side. Some days a lot, some days just a little bit, some days that they're just firing artillery and drones back and forth with no changes. But every day it's causing Ukrainian soldiers to be killed in action. And again, it's a zero-sum deal, and it's a loss. It's a net loss every single month. So if you see this as Ukrainians and say, we're going to be hopeful because Trump turned it back on. That's bad because there is this belief that we're feeding that it can make a difference. Washington Post is the biggest egregious violator of that. They listed all this stuff that, yeah, this can change the course. This can actually help Ukraine to be able to get their feet back on. It won't do any of those things. And there's graphic evidence over 3.5 years to prove it. You don't even have to take my word for it. Just look at the wreckage behind you, Washington Post, and then at least have the guts, I guess, to examine and say, okay, now if they give a few more missiles here, if they give a lot more missiles, if they go back to the Biden era stuff where they're just cleaning out the inventories that we got, what is that going to do? Because what is the other side of that calculation looking like? And what does Russia have here? And then how will that turn it around? That's what's missing. That's what's missing from any of this. There is none of that at the elite level. And yet they're the ones that are advocating giving our stuff away. And I'm telling you right now, if we get into a fight somewhere, we will not have enough of the ammunition we have to sustain combat, and we don't have the industrial capacity to sustain it over time. It simply doesn't exist. It physically doesn't exist. We don't have the stockpiles, and we don't have the defense capacity. So we are making ourselves very, very strategically vulnerable. That is a fact, ladies and gentlemen. That is not an opinion. That is a fact. Demonstrable, mathematical. It's a fact. The best thing the United States can do right now is to get this war off the table at whatever cost, frankly, because we have to defend ourselves. We have to make sure that America can defend itself if we are attacked by somebody, because this signals big time weakness. It signals that we don't know what we're doing, number one, and that may make somebody think they can take advantage of us. And that somebody who's, I don't know, who has the capacity, whether Russia or China, to be able to sustain conflict, because China has learned the lessons and they do have the industrial capacity, probably as much as Russia, maybe even more in some categories. They have definitely more in the missiles. They have foreseen this for a long time, and their capacity to produce missiles of all different categories is substantial, and ours is minuscule. Ours is designed to keep the industrial capacity high, the military industrial capacity happy, by keeping on with these super expensive missiles and whatever at a relatively modest rate, which just keeps them in these companies. I mean, they love it because it's a good business model. And part of me doesn't blame them, because they're just in business to make money. That's what they do. So they're going to maximize their ability to make money. That means they're going to send out people to lobby Congress. They're going to make commercials that talk about how they're defending America, whatever, to maximize this, to keep the status quo going so that they keep getting more and more money and their profits just go through the roof. So they're happy with that. Problem is, that's not how you can fight a war. As Russia learned, its pain in the first year and a half is what it took them to get back into order. It appears that the Chinese side has learned it. And God forbid that we should get in war with any of them, but this makes it more likely because they're aware of how weak we are. And God help us all if they should ever take the decision to actually act on that. I hope that they don't. It still wouldn't be in their interest to do so, I don't believe, because the cost to them would still be high. It's not like we're defenseless and don't have any teeth. We do. We still have a lot of power and a lot of ability to cause harm. It's just not enough to win a war, and it's not enough to prevent a loss. So it could come at a large cost there, and the global economy would just be devastated if something like that were to happen. So there's reason for them not to do it, and I hope they don't. But the problem is, our security is basically contingent upon somebody else not doing something that we don't want them to do, not because we have the deterrent capacity to knock them away from thinking about doing it, which used to be the case. It was the case in the distant past. It's not the case now. That's why I'm so aggravated about this and why I'm so animated, because this is harming American national defense. It is not helping it, folks. It is not helping it. You need to know that. We'll see what happens from here forward. We're going to keep monitoring all of these things here. And of course, every day that, the war gets closer to an unpleasant conclusion. And we'll see if President Trump finally wakes up and says, all right, this is a losing proposition. He's done that in the past. Let's hope he does it in the present. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.